Grateful that you asked the Center for Food Integrity to be with you today, and commend you, first of all, for showing up. Secondly, for your theme today of changing mindsets. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the consumer mindset, what that means to today's food and agriculture. I'm going to share with you a couple models that the center uses, in particular our trust model, our sustainability model. We're going to delve into some of our research that we do with consumers, and then at the end we'll wrap all of that up and give you some suggestions, at least from my standpoint, of some things that you might be willing and want to do next. You can note here my email address. Again, if there's any questions, communication, conversation you want to have about any of these concepts on changing mindsets, would be glad to engage you a little bit in that. First of all, the mission of the Center for Food Integrity is solely to build consumer trust and confidence in today's food system. We were formed in 2007 with several principles that we wanted to accomplish. First of all, we wanted to make sure that today's consumer had accurate and balanced information about today's food. We also wanted to aggressively work at correcting misinformation as it occurred in the marketplace, highlight those within the food system that were utilizing best practices, good practices, successful practices to build consumer trust and confidence, and finally to engage stakeholders to build consensus around issues that are of a concern to consumers. And the reality of this platform of just simply building consumer trust gives us a venue with the entire food system. Building consumer trust is something that everybody can embrace. And at the end of the day, if the consumer's trust is being built, everybody wins in that regard. So consequently, we have food production, we have food processing, we have retailers, we have NGOs, some responsible, some irresponsible, that play a part in the kinds of things that we do at the Center for Food Integrity. But solely our focus, we don't defend brands, we don't make policy, we're not defending certain practices, and therefore the consumer sees us as kind of a neutral third party here in the midst of the food system. Our vision is really twofold. First of all, on the outward-facing part of the vision, we want to be a part of leading the conversation with today's consumer about food. We all know we need to grow the food system. We need to feed 9+ billion people, yet we need to do that responsibly and in a way that the increase in our production aligns with consumer values. So we want to lead that conversation and help the consumer understand that there are ethical choices that we can make that have consequences 20, 30, 40, 100 years down the road. And talking to the consumer about that. The second aspect is more of our internal facing part of the vision, and that is talking to the food system, just like we're doing today, where we begin to have that conversation that we can have the supply chain more closely align their values and their priorities with that the consumer has. So that in essence is really what we try to do. You'll find us in a number of places on the web. You can go to foodintegrity.org. That's where you can find out anything and everything about us. I'm going to share some research. If you want to delve more deeply into the research, go to foodintegrity.org. You'll find webinars there. You'll find slide presentations there. You'll find philosophies there. You'll find a number of things in that space. CFIengage.org. This is really for you in the food production family. There you will find our talking points. You'll find values-based communication. We have opinion editorials, letters to the editor. You're free to use anything and everything that we have. You pull our name off of it, put your name in it. We're fine with that, all right? You can have today's presentation, any of that stuff. We do ask that you attribute source if you want to use some of that, but we want you to use some of the things that we have already developed. And CFI Engage is kind of that family site where you'll get access to that. Bestfoodfacts.org is a consumer site where we simply answer common consumer questions about today's food. And you'll find we do weekly postings to that. We utilize a whole group of food system experts globally that will address food system issues. Farmers Feed Us is just one of the programs that we utilize where we increase the visibility of what food production is all about with consumers. And then Choose to Choose is probably our least developed site at this point. It's a fairly narrow site that is devoted to those that really want to advocate the freedom of choice. But those will be the web presence that you can find us in. Changing mindsets, today's food conversation. Why are we even having this? Well, no news to you, food production has changed dramatically over the last 100 years. The use and responsible use of technology, our consolidation, our integration, our intensification of the food production system has yielded great benefits. We're more efficient today than we've ever been. Food is safer today than it's ever been. We're more sustainable. We're protecting natural resources. We're utilizing fewer natural resources to produce more food. And today's food is extremely affordable to those of us in North America. Great benefits that have been happening. But there's also been some things happening on the consumer side. They've moved from rural areas to urban centers. Today we face a growing population that is generationally and geographically removed from how food is produced. In some cases, you have to go back 3 generations to find someone who actually visited a farm or lived on a farm. And because of that, they are disconnected from how food is produced. And when they get disconnected, we are also living in a digital age, they start to ask questions. And this is no news to you. But what it does do is it applies greater pressure to you. And they start to question, sometimes just from an information standpoint, sometimes from an opinion standpoint, they start to question the practices that you are using. They're asking you to demonstrate in a more responsible way how you are committed to growing food in accordance with their values, their priorities, and their ethics. And there's growing pressure to change. And so we're having this conversation, and really it starts, and what I want to do is just spend a moment talking about consumer trust, a basic model in how we do that and how we build that. One of the things that it's important to always do is figure out where it is that you want to end up. And the reality is, almost everyone in this room likes the freedom to operate. At the end of the day, we want to have the ability to utilize our skills, our expertise, our ability with minimal outside disruption. Well, in today's society, where everybody that has a cell phone ends up being a cinematographer, the reality is for you and I to operate in an environment with minimal disruption is really a pipe dream. Everybody is interested in the kinds of things that we do. But we want to protect that. We want to have the ability to be flexible and responsive, and we want to protect our freedom to operate. In order to do that, we have to maintain what we call a social license. Now, a social license, as we define it, is simply this privilege to operate with minimal formalized restrictions. And the way we identify those restrictions are legislation, regulation, or market requirements based upon maintaining public trust by doing what's right. So first of all, a stakeholder today is any individual or any organization that has an interest in what you do or in how what you do impacts them in some form or fashion. The thing to remember about stakeholders is they pick you, you don't pick them. Now we can identify most of our stakeholders, but we don't get to choose them. They choose us at the end of the day. And public trust is this belief that the activities that we conduct are going to be consistent with their social expectations, their values, the values of the community, and the values of other stakeholders. And so it's important for us, as we think about protecting the freedom to operate, that we have to maintain this social license. Let me spend just a moment and share with you why maintaining and protecting your social license really is not an act of altruism, but really is an act of enlightened self-interest. Now, in social license, the reality is we have great flexibility. We can make changes with minimal disruptions. We can be responsive when the market changes. And the beauty of all of this is that we can do these kinds of things at lower cost, right? So the consumer will give us social license provided that the practices that we implement align with their ethics, their values, and their expectations, and that there's probably some form of self-regulation. You are looking at yourself to ensure that you are committed and doing that which you say you are doing, all right? And as long as you're operating in that space, the consumer will give you social license. But when you start to lose that space, you cross what's called a tipping point, all right, on that fulcrum. And that could simply be today a single triggering event, or it might be a cumulative set of events. It could be an undercover video. It could be a food recall. It could be some form of regulatory compliance issues, some environmental mishap. It could be a variety of different things, but you start to move across that spectrum. And when the consumer believes that the danger or the risk of your practice outweighs the benefit that's going to accrue to them, then they will not hesitate at all to ask for more social control. And that more social control increases your rigidity, so it's going to cut back on your flexibility here. It's going to mean that others now are looking in from the outside, and that could be more legislation, that could be more regulation, or the third aspect that's really hitting us today is the market now intervening and asking for more mandates in how food is produced or practices that are used. And at the end of the day, that means higher costs to you, less margin, putting more pressure on you to grow your operation, to increase your throughput, to ensure that you maintain a reasonable profit margin. So it's regulation, it's legislation, it's litigation, it's compliance. And so the reality is you want to stay on this side of social license because the moment you lose social license, this is a one-way street. If you lose social license and go to social control, the reality of you ever going back to social license as you knew it is pretty slim. In fact, at best, you're just going to get some improvement to social control. Maybe a little lighter regulation, maybe a little less legislation. But as we know, those things don't easily disappear, do they? Maybe some easing to the marketplace, but it's really a one-way street. So it's important for us to maintain the social license because at the end of the day, we want to build trust. And trust is just simply this aspect of the consumer saying, do you share my values? And can I trust you to do what's right? Right? And so understanding that we want to protect the freedom to operate, in order to do that, we maintain the social license. And I would argue that your greatest asset in this room is investing in building sustainable trust. Now, when we started the Center for Food Integrity, we thought that we were going to be putting together programming and have conversations about how to enhance the image of food production or processing or retailing and serving. And as I shared last evening, we had a senior level executive with a global food company kind of change our reality and say, you know, you don't have an image problem, you have a trust problem. It's not that you need to buff up the image and make it shine more. It's the reality that the consumer doesn't trust you. They're disconnected from you. They don't understand you. And so therefore, you need to be building trust. And that caused us to really rethink our whole approach to this and why we really adopted the sole mission to build consumer trust, because that's something that everybody could embrace. But it put us on this track of finding out, so really what builds trust in the consumer? And we started with a meta-analysis of 21 studies that we found at that time that talked about building trust in food. And we wanted to know, what are the common elements? Are there some common drivers here? And what are the variables that exist in an effort to build trust? And we found 3 of them. They are influential others, competence, and confidence. Influential others, that driver or that commonality is basically friends and family. Those from your social network, those that share a similar view to you, those are ones that you tend to pay attention to, understand, seek out, and get information from. The other aspect of influential others is credentialed individuals, those that have some form of credentialing, usually a higher educational level, that easily or more influentially instruct you in making decisions. So this could be doctors, dietitians, health professionals, veterinarians, nurses, those that have additional credentialing. Competence is really what we tend to be very good at and very comfortable talking about in food production. That's our science, that's our technical expertise, that's our ability to get something done. And again, the consumer does look at that from an influential standpoint. It does build trust, particularly if they know that you have the mental capacity and that you are practicing that on a consistent and regular basis. That does enhance their trust. The third driver, though, is confidence, which is value similarity and alignment with their values. Now, we tested this model with well over 10,000 consumers over the last 5 years, and the big thing that we found out is that confidence or shared values is 3 to 5 times more important in building consumer trust than your competence. Now, think about that a minute. For years, we've been saying that if the consumer could just understand what we do, if I can just explain it to them, they will trust me. If they just understood the science behind what we do, they would trust us. And this research says, you know what, that's not correct. That's not correct. That's why it's been important for us to test this and have it peer-reviewed and published in the Journal of Rural Sociology, because we know it's a game changer. And that if we can begin to more effectively communicate our values to the consumer, that we're likely to more greatly enhance their trust in us than simply sharing with them our science and our information. Not that those aren't important, but what they're really asking is, do you share my values? You think about the whole local food movement. That's what this is saying. Local food means you are like me. You are more like me than some impersonal corporation or some industrial food system out there that I don't know. Okay? And so it really changed the game for us in how we talk about today's food. And not to be overly trite about this, but it goes back to this old adage that they really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's the question that they are asking. So let's talk just briefly about why values and ethics are important and how that meshes, or maybe even sometimes clashes, with our science-based culture, because sometimes we struggle with this issue. Well, there's a social psychologist by the name of Lawrence Kohlberg. Besides being a snappy dresser, he was undoubtedly a great social psychologist from the University of Chicago. He spent his whole life in looking at, from his work world anyway, in looking at how consumers make decisions, particularly when they're faced with a moral or an ethical dilemma. What is it that they go through? What thought process do they follow? And he identified 3 different levels, 6 different stages of how people move through a decision-making process that hopefully today will be helpful for you in understanding just how we communicate messages. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to unintentionally walk in and start crafting messages that are really detracting from that information that we really want the consumer to know. So let's just walk through this for just a minute. 3 different levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. It starts with really self-interest, all right? Maybe those of you that have kids can understand this. Maybe those of you that are still kids understand this, that if I clean my room, things go better with Mom, right? Or for the men in the room, if I would clean my garage, I may not have to sleep on the couch. Things would go better for me, all right? So there's this issue of if I obey, there's less punishment. And I'm encouraged then to do things right. Beyond that, then, there's this personal rewards benefit. You know what? If I do things right, then there's some reward that accrues to me. Things go better for me, all right? But it's a direct impact on me. That's why I make those decisions. As you progress in that, then you begin to understand, you know, there's a certain level of expectation that it's important to make right decisions because of what other people will think about me. So Kohlberg called it the good boy or the nice girl orientation, that I'm more aware of the world around me and how people think. Beyond that, then, there's this law and order orientation, that we begin to understand that some aspects of our society are actually good for us, and that I can comply with those kinds of things, and that's really important for me. And then you start to slip into this third level, where it's the social contract, that really at the end of the day, doing those right things are the correct thing to do because it benefits society. It really does help. And then the highest level of this is the universal ethical principle orientation, that everybody ought to be doing it because it's the right thing to do, all right? Which is the highest level within Kohlberg. Now, let's apply this to agriculture for just a minute. When we start to message around the fact that we take care of land or animals because that's where we get the best return on investment, or because that's where I live, I drink the same water, I eat the same food, do you see where that's really all about me? It's about me. It's not that I'm not protecting the land or taking responsible care of animals because it's the right thing to do. I'm doing it because it's where I make the most money. And of course, I would do these kinds of things because this is my livelihood. But what that implies is if you could make more profit by not doing that, then you wouldn't implement that practice. Okay? And sometimes we unintentionally communicate these things to consumers. Or how many of us at times have said, you know what, I do these things, I implement these practices because I'm required to do them. It's the law. I want to stay in compliance. But what that's still communicating is somebody from the outside is looking at me, and I'm concerned about what they might think if I don't do those kinds of things. And the universal ethical principle orientation says, you know, I take care of the land, I take care of animals because it's my ethical obligation. I have employees, I have stewardship responsibilities here, and I'm responsible for the environment. You are trusting me in that area, and so therefore I want to be not only a good citizen of the community, but really I do things right. And I do things right for the right reasons. This is owning what we call the moral high ground. And really, at the end of the day, you have that. And with the attacks on the industry, it's something that we need to really win back. We need to be articulating those messages in that manner. It's not that we don't take care of these things. It's not that we don't have these values. It's oftentimes we don't really effectively communicate it to the consumer in a way that they understand that we share their values. Now, we talk about attacks, understand that non-government organizations have really been formed around protecting the common good. So you have to understand that there's a credibility bonus that automatically goes to an NGO or an advocacy group or even an activist group when they enter into this conversation, because the public understands that they exist for some form of public good, right? You enter this equation with a credibility deficit. It's automatically built in because at the end of the day, you have to make a profit or you don't exist. So they already understand that you've got a different motive than what an NGO has. And it's not that you can't overcome this deficit. You can. But you need to have an understanding that you automatically have a credibility deficit. It's not that profit's wrong. It's just that you have to make sure that you're communicating alignment with consumer values and expectations so that they understand, yes, at the end of the day you need to make a profit, but you're really doing the right things for all the right reasons, the same thing that the NGO is talking about. And so that's why we have what we call our sustainability model, and we put it together in the form of a triangle. And if you'll notice on the base of the triangle, all three of these aspects really need to be in play if we're to have a sustainable system. But it starts with ethically grounded messages. In other words, they don't want you substituting scientific verification for ethical justification. And most of the questions that we get in the food system today are ethical questions, not science questions. They are, should you house that many animals in barns? Should you be using biotechnology? Should you be adding additional hormones to increase milk production or beef production? Should antibiotics be in feed? Those are all ethical questions. They are should questions. And oftentimes our default mechanism is to go back to science and says, science says we can do that. Science has proven that it's okay. All right? But can and should are two different issues. Consumers are asking should questions, we're giving them can answers, and as I said last night, we're just not connecting at the level that they want the connection. So they need to know that we align with them in these 5 core values of compassion, of responsibility, of respect, fairness, and truth. That's really what they're asking. Tell me about you. I'm disconnected. I'm generationally removed. I'm geographically removed. I just have some basic questions about food. And I want to know, are you sharing those same values with me? Now, I know we've got a science audience. Science is still important, but you can't build trust off of science. Science needs to be there for the objectivity, for the measurability. We have to have that, but it's not the foundation to building trust. Ethics is. And at the end of the day, we can also talk about the viability that we need to have economically. The consumer understands that. They just don't want that to be the lead point of the conversation, because what they're looking for is, do you align with my values? If you do that, then it opens up opportunities to have the science conversation, to have the economical question, to have the dialogue about whether or not this decision is the ethical choice to make in a situation. Okay? So what we often do, though, is we talk about economics and science, we build their knowledge, but we do nothing to really talk to them about their feelings and their belief. And they are more likely to make a decision based off their feelings and belief than they are off of increased knowledge. Does that make sense? Just some of you shake your heads, make sure I know you're still awake. I know it's the first thing in the morning. Okay, all right. That's why if you're furiously taking notes, you can have all these slides, all right? They're yours. Let's talk a little bit about quantitative research, and before I do that, you just need to understand a couple things about quantitative research. First of all, 90% of Americans believe they are more intelligent than the average American. "62% of you in the room believe you are more attractive than the average man or the average woman. So we have a tendency to overstate our intelligence as well as our attractiveness. So just keep that in mind whenever you're looking at research. I have to do the quick commercial because these sponsors are vital to the lifeblood of the kinds of things that we do. We have to generate these funds for our research every year. So again, I'm thankful for several of these organizations that continue to invest year in, year out in our work. We also have a number of states that also get involved because we oversample consumers in their state as a way to compare what their state consumers believe versus the national data set. Let me just quickly cover a couple things in regards to the research. First of all, this is a nationwide annual trust study that we do. We're just getting ready to field our 2012 study. This one was fielded in 2011. This year will be our 6th year of doing it, so the data you're looking at is 5 years of accumulation. We do that for the reasons of benchmarking consumer attitudes. We want to identify concerns, we test programs, we test messages, as well as in find out what messages are actually growing trust and bolstering confidence. It's a long survey. It's web-based, it's 30 minutes. It was equally balanced between men and women and had all the standard splits of a normal population. And again, this is for the United States. We did not measure in all of North America. The 5 top consumer concerns, and this is an aided question. We give them 17 life issues. What we want to know is when you think about food, what are you thinking about? What's top priority in your mind? Well, they're telling us that the first 5 things, really actually the first 8 things, really have nothing to do with the food system other than food cost. But that's really more an issue about how the economy is affecting me. So they told us the economy was a top issue, unemployment was there, healthcare issues, concerns of that, concerns with the rising cost of food, concerns with the rising cost of energy. So food issues were not top of mind. In fact, you had to go into number 9 before food safety kind of piqued their interest. And food safety for the last 5 years has been the number 1 concern of consumers. 53% said they were very concerned about food safety. Humane treatment was number 12 out of a list of 17. That tells us it's not top of mind, right? 42% were very concerned about the humane treatment of animals, but this is one of the reasons why advocacy groups that are opposed to animal agriculture have to continue this process of undercover videos and the like because they know it's not top of mind. And so they have to continue to bring it to the surface to get the consumer thinking about it. Environmental sustainability perhaps might be higher here in Canada than it was in the United States. 14 out of 17, only 40% really concerned with environmental sustainability. Number 17 on the list, though, having enough food to feed people in developing countries. It was number 17 out of 17. It's the last thing that they really think about. This was an aided question. In fact, 26% said they were very concerned on that issue. More, 27% said they were not concerned at all about that issue. Now, you know, that may be a sad report on the United States that they're not really concerned about other people. But at the end of the day, if you think about that in general terms, most of us really are selfish by nature, are we not? We're more concerned about our world and what's impacting us than we are about others. We also use the Everett-Rogers model for the adoption and diffusion of innovations. And the reason we do that is we want to segment the population. The Rogers model segments the population into 5 different classifications. Innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. Now, most people don't identify themselves as being a laggard, all right? But we give them these questions. These are self-classifications. These are dependent upon the issue. So, like my children can be early adopters in cell phone technology and laggards in financial management. So just because they're an early adopter in one area doesn't mean that they're going to be an early adopter in other areas. But the innovators tend to be quick about their decisions, rarely ask anybody else for input, just make the decision. The early adopter actively seeks information. They want to make an informed decision, okay, or have an informed opinion. The early majority tends to make up their mind after everybody else has debated this at length. The late majority says, you know what, I really don't even think about this unless I see it someplace. And then the laggard, I'll only change and if I'm forced to change, okay? Those are the laggards. Now, we focus on the early adopter at the Center for Food Integrity, and there's a reason why we do that. Number one, we can't get to all the population with our funding base, so we want to get to those that are most influential. And the early adopter or the opinion-leading consumer does that. Here are just some aspects of their personality. They tend to be more educated. They do have larger interpersonal networks. They are information seekers, and they are opinion leaders. In other words, what information they gather, they're going to tell somebody else about it. They tend to be more rational, more intelligent. They're more favorable to change. They're able to deal with uncertainty and risk, and they're more favorable to science. And there are some other attributes there as well, but that's the reason why we focus on the early adopter. Now, in our study, here is the makeup of the early adopters. First of all, women tend to be more early adopters than men, okay? So they tend to be more highly concerned about all food issues. They are also the most influential in dealing with food issues, and they are the most influenced in dealing with food issues, all right? So just something to keep in mind. Now, in the United States, on the nutrition aspect, nearly 50%, 1 in 2 consumers say they're an early adopter, all right, seeking information to make an informed choice and have an informed opinion in the area of nutrition. If you get into food safety, it's 1 in 3. You get into looking at the use of technology and innovation to grow the food system, roughly 30% or so of the population says they are actively seeking information in that. When it comes to environmental sustainability, a little less, so 25% of the population say they're an early adopter. Again, these are self-classed identifications. And then when it came to humane treatment in farm animals, 1 in 4. The thing about humane treatment in farm animals, they were the highest innovator class. So they're the most dogmatic. Remember, they're the ones that make a decision, rarely rely on others, okay? They say, I know inhumane treatment when I see it, I don't have to ask anybody else. I know what it is. And they were the highest innovator class. We also had a large gender gap here. In other words, women much more concerned in this issue, in this area, than men were. Just something to keep in mind. We also gave them 100 points and said, all right, what are your priority goals when it comes to food choices? At the end of the day, the net of all of this, what do you look at? Now, I'm going to just split this into 3 categories because that's about as close as I can get. But really, safe, affordable, nutritious, or healthy food are king, all right? So those are the driving issues. Those are the results of the food system that they're looking for. That's what they want, all right? Those are the personal benefits that they accrue from the food system. Once those are met, then they're looking at the implications of this output of the food system. So then they're concerned with, is food grown in ways that you're reducing the use of herbicides and pesticides, you're protecting natural resources, you're taking good care of animals, all right? And then at the end, those things that are what we tend to think of the mechanics of food, the things that we tend to like to talk about, our efficiencies, our effectiveness, the number of people we feed, all of those kinds of things, those really drop to the bottom as far as priority goals when it comes to the consumer. Something to keep in mind. So again, if you're talking about safe, affordable, nutritious, healthy food, those messages need to touch, whatever message you have needs to touch on those benefits in some form or fashion, because that's where they're going to most easily connect with you. All right? How food is produced is secondary to them, and in some cases only marginally interesting. Feeding the world, sustaining the environment, efficient, profitable food production. If you're going to talk about those things, make sure you connect them with the personal benefits that the consumer is looking for. Safe, nutritious, healthy, affordable food, all right? Because that's really what's important to them. What they want is, when they say they want safe food, they don't want to have to worry about food. When they say they want affordable food, they want to keep more of their money to do more of the things that they want to do. They still want healthy choices. Whether they buy nutritious food or not, they want to have that choice, all right? So there's an assumption that food grown today is safe, is healthy, is affordable. They also then want the environment cleaner, healthier. What we also tested, and I'll just show this for those of you that are scientists in the room to make sure you know we're doing statistically modeling on this. We looked in 2011 at an expanded trust model. In other words, we backed into confidence and competence and really wanted to measure those drivers behind that. We also wanted to go out beyond trust because even though the consumer can trust us, they may not be willing to support us in some of the practices that we do. So that is part of what we measured. We also measured the model with two defined farmer groups. We wanted to look at food production last year. There's three different ways that the consumer will look at the differentiation between these two: size, decision-making, and structure. In previous surveys, we really have no uniform context for size. So we took size off the table, stuck it in the parking lot, and said that we can't use that as a measuring tool. So we measured off of decision-making and structure. We said a family farm is owned and operated by a family. The decisions on how to operate the farm are made by the family and implemented by the family. The commercial farm is owned by a company, operated by employee farmers. Decisions are made by managers and carried out then by employees. That is the differentiation that we made. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to measure here what consumers believed, all right, what they felt the performance was, and what their expectations were of these different farming groups. Because when performance doesn't meet expectations, there's tension, right? When I don't clean the garage and get that done the way my wife wanted me to clean the garage, there tends to be some tension. You can apply it in a lot of different contexts, but performance and expectation are good measuring tools. Just briefly here, we looked at the family farmer, right? So what's the performance? What are the priorities? And then what are the expectations? What you're looking for here in this patchwork quilt is alignment, okay? So for 2011 with family farms, there's fairly close alignment. Affordable food, safe food, even though they're a little tick off there, nutritious food, they're all right there, okay? They believe that again, family farmers think about profitability, and it's okay. They expect that. But all the way up and down, you see fairly close alignment, all right, with family farmers. With commercial farmers, you're now going to see differentiation, all right, or tension or stress levels start to occur here, all right? Profitability. They believe that you are focused on profitability, and they really think you need to focus less on profitability. All right? That's their expectation. They hear you talking about your productivity. They don't want to hear about your productivity. They don't hear you talking about humane treatment, and they do want you talking more about humane treatment. Also, environmental sustainability, and again, this may differ for Canada somewhat. Environmental sustainability is one category off as well. So it helps us understand where there isn't alignment, and then allows us opportunity to message more effectively around those issues. So in general, consumers believe that safe, affordable, nutritious food should be the priority, regardless of farm size. That's important to them. They believe that profitability and productivity for the commercial farmer are the next higher priorities, and they're saying that doesn't align with our value system. And then they're also suspicious, and we said this last night, that the larger you get, they're concerned that as you get large, you're going to put profit ahead of principle. And that's really where their concern is. If you are a large family farm, you will be interpreted as a commercial farm, unless you are going to great levels to ensure that the family is visible and shows that they're part of the decision-making structure and making and implementing those decisions. So that's why we say if you're a large farm, you need to really spend a disproportionate amount of your time and energy talking about your values because they believe you're putting profit ahead of principle. They're skeptical of that, and so they really need to know what your values are. The other thing is if you want to talk about profitability and productivity, then tie it to the personal benefits that are going to accrue to the consumer. Explain to them why it makes food safer, why it makes food more affordable, why it makes food more nutritious and healthy for them, or how it's protecting the natural resources. All right? So really there's this inverse proportion that's going on. The larger you get, the more time you need to spend talking to consumer about your ethics, about your values, and about your priorities. Quickly, some ideas on sources of information about the food system. And again, you can go to our website and get a lot more depth on this, so I'm just going to give you the highlights of that. Family and friends are the highest go-to source for information about food. All right? Their personal networks, their social networks. All right? People that have a similar worldview is where they're going to go. For early adopters, more than half of them go to the web and family and friends to get that information. 1 in 5 are going to local television, 10% are going to newspaper, 2%, sorry for those of you in the radio industry, only 2% were actually going to the radio to get more information. No surprise, Google is the primary search engine. Nutrition and food safety topics are the most researched. Advocacy groups tend to be the least likely web content sites to search. Okay? Advocacy groups are not only those that are perhaps anti, but that includes those of you that are involved in nonprofit associations. Consumers not likely to go to you first to get that information. How this has changed over the years, family and friends continues to grow. Going to local television continues to decline. Again, early adopters are increasingly going to websites. They're also going to food-specific cable television to get information. Newspaper and radio continue to lose influence, particularly among the early adopters. And again, friends and family and websites, early adopters are going there. As far as talking about food, credible third parties are the most effective. So those of you that are involved in some higher institutions of learning, it behooves you to step up and begin to do more messaging around food issues, because the consumer perceives you as not being biased in that regard. So university research, those of you that are involved in government, doctors, dietitians, those are the most respected sources. Right? If you're an advocacy group, if you're food bloggers, if you're a food celebrity, you are the least effective in messaging food system information. Farmer videos were important, particularly among women, and impactful to opinion leaders. Again, just a little note on Wikipedia, men were more likely, statistically more likely to use Wikipedia, local TV, and social networks to get their information in regards to food. Okay, just briefly, here are the top things to know about the research. Number one, consumers do believe that family farmers produce safer food compared to commercial farmers. They do want third-party verification. They want some way to ensure that right methods are being implemented and followed. They will tolerate a number of dislikes about food production methods as long as food is safe. Okay, that's their priority goal. Only 1 in 5 consumers believe that today's food system is safer than when they were growing up. That's a real shocker to me, but that's what they believe. They do believe that family farmers are better land stewards than commercial farmers. They do admit that commercial farmers are probably more educated, but they put more credibility into experience and practical training coming from the family farmers than they do the educational expertise. Right? And if you really get down into the nuances of that, it's not statistically significant. It's just an inference in that regard. Specialized nutrition and manure handling. We tested a number of intensive farming practices. Those were the most readily acceptable farming practices. Those that with the lowest support was the use of antibiotics and hormones to enhance productivity. When it comes to technology, there's a greater adoption by the consumer to have GM foods in their fruit and produce side, as well as in corn and soybeans and sorghum in use in animal diets than in strictly meat production. All right, so they're more favorable in that regard. Again, we talked about universities, governments, doctors, top sources, celebrities, blogs, websites, the most least effective. Videos using technology, not talking about technology, but using technology, were effective on 1 in 3 consumers. And then we also we do some educational stimulus in this. The message of utilizing GM crops and its resulting impact on reduced needs of pesticides and herbicides showed the greatest improvement after education. When it comes to animal well-being, women are much, much, much more responsive to messages on animal well-being than men, statistically significant. And only 1 in 4, 25% of the U.S. population strongly believe that animals are humanely treated. We're losing ground here. 30% of the consumers in 2010 believed they were humanely treated. So when you think about undercover videos, the resulting impact of that is kind of like a drip on a rock. It just erodes trust, erodes trust, erodes trust. That's why you need to have an effective strategy to address the misinformation in those videos when it comes out. Economics, 53% say that food prices are a greater concern. Only 30% agree that, at least in the United States, that U.S. food was the most affordable. I just think that they're just not well traveled in that regard. Anyway, they don't care, for the most part, where food is produced, as long as it's safe, affordable, and wholesome. 1 in 3, 30%, and this is growing, believe that organic food is more healthful than conventional food. This is the other piece that we really tested, and that was feeding the world, because we know that message is out there. More consumers are not concerned with us feeding the world than are concerned with us feeding the world. Right? And I understand this may be a caveat just for the United States, but the reality is when we talk to the opinion leaders, they see that as a tactic and as a guise to grow the food system. And what they're saying is, you know what, I don't like the industrial model. You're not going to convince me to like the industrial model. I don't see any personal benefit accruing from the industrial model. So if you will start showing me that the industrial model really has my values, then you can talk to me about the benefits that it brings to me, and you're probably more likely then to increase my trust. That's really what that is saying. Yeah, 40% don't believe that the U.S. has a responsibility to provide food. 35% said it's more a matter of distribution versus supply, and more of them would rather teach somebody to fish than give them the fish. Okay, so how do we use this? Well, this is what I like about your theme, changing mindsets. Because if you really want to change this, you can't use the same mindset that we used to get here. There has to be a change in what we do and in what we say and in what we think about the consumer. Again, remember, people don't care what you know until they know you care. All right? So understand that. Number 2, if you want to connect with non-farmer audiences, our research shows that you need values-based outreach with credible information from a trusted source if you want to connect with them. All right? So put those two in combination. Any of your programs that are going to break down these barriers and allow the food production or the processing side to get closer to the consumer, all the better, all right? That does build trust and confidence. The other thing is consumers are accessing information through a wide variety of channels. So rather than them coming to you, you need to be where they're going. And that's about identifying key stakeholder groups and being present when they want that information. It also shows that early adopters are relying on the web, so you need a strong web presence coupled with credible information if you want to produce and promote a more positive attitude. The other thing here is building trust is going to take some time. This may be a generational issue. We didn't get here overnight. We don't get out of here overnight, so it's going to take some time to build that up, and we need to be consistent in that. We can close the gap if we are willing to look in the mirror and willing to say, you know what, I admit that perhaps we may need to modify some practices here. We at least need to take a look at modifying some practices here, all right? Anything that will increase your transparency and your your observability is going to enhance trust at the end of the day. Also, when you find that actions by the food system are grossly inconsistent with today's value set, you need to speak out about that, right? Talk about that. The consumer is a very forgiving consumer, but they do want people brought to public judgment if there are gross inconsistencies. And we could talk a lot about that. The other thing to remember is just the fact that we are in an integrated system today, all right? It used to be that if we just remembered and talked to the producer and the processor and the distributor, and we've done great things with that through intensification and integration, that was the only world. But the reality is today the marketplace is exercising mandates. So you have to be communicating with the grocers and the restaurants and the brands, because oftentimes they are the purveyors of trust at a local level. You also need to remember the NGOs. Because what they're doing is they're bypassing legislation, they're bypassing regulation, they're going directly to the brand and applying the pressure to get the changes that they want. And so the things that we've been talking about at the center is just in that whole integrated system, this reminder that we really need to be taking a much more holistic view, in this case to animal agriculture, if we want to be sustainable. That we're in today, as I said last night, we're in a biological system. You can change variables if you want to change variables. But when you change a variable, you change the whole system. There are implications to that. And it behooves those in the NGO community and in the grocer, retailer, brand community that if they want a certain change, that we come to the table and have the informed conversation of what that's going to mean before you act on the change. So we understand that the supply chain can do this. The supply chain can supply it consistently and in an affordable manner so that you can continue to grow your business. And I'm going to end up with really where we started, and that is, this is really the trust model just put in a little different form. So if you want to take something home, this is really where you're asking yourselves, first of all, am I principle-driven? Whether that's on my farm or in my business. In other words, have I discovered what my values are? Am I talking about my values? Am I ensuring that my employees understand our values and that it's drilled and drilled and drilled into them what our values are so it becomes integrated and part of the culture. This is just who we are, and we're simply implementing who we are, right? That's the first step in doing that. Once you have that done, then you can move to that middle step, which is engaging stakeholders. Again, you can identify the stakeholders, can't pick them, but you can identify them. And so whether that's consumers, whether that's policymakers, whether it's opinion leaders, media, NGOs, identify those stakeholders and be communicating them on a regular and a consistent basis. And then lastly, thinking about how am I going to continue to prove that I'm committed to these values. And it's about looking at best management practices, certification programs, continuing education, looking for ways that you can continue to prove that you are committed to being ethically grounded, scientifically justified, economically viable so that the consumer understands you at the end of the day. Again, here are just some other resources that you can look at the Center for Food Integrity. That last one, the Farmer Resource Center, if you want talking points, if you want values-based messages, I didn't go into explaining how those are put together. You're free to use any of our information, and I appreciate you taking some time to listen to our models.